So my next one is, also goes to violation. You've answered that. There's a typo on page 29. I don't know. I won't waste time with that.
Question on your one on page 28. Because as I was reading this, it says, this section outlines the process for reviewing projects to identify critical area requirements that apply. And then unless exempt in 1830 through 1860, or 1830, all development activities must undergo this review. Prior to approval, sufficient information must be provided to demonstrate. I guess what I'm trying to make sure we're not doing here, because right now a person there is some work that a person can do to start their project prior to the approval of their actual building permit. And I want to make sure that we're not in any way no longer allowing that. And so, I mean, I just was reading it as how he was talking, but I thought that it must, somewhere I was reading that it must be approved prior to proceeding, or that prior to removal of vegetation, all development activities must undergo this review. And that review process is they'll receive plans, application materials, if requested, conduct a site visit. Are you comfortable that there's nothing we're doing here that is saying a person can no longer do any of their site development prior to approval of plans? They would have to have submitted their plans prior to being able to do any of this work. I guess my point is that if I've done the due diligence and I've looked and said I'm outside my 300 feet and I'm outside my 200 feet, I want to be confident that a property owner can proceed, even if they don't plan to submit a development permit for another year. But they might want to do some of because they've got funds available now and they want to do some of their, maybe their septic work or some of the other work. There's nothing that's going to prevent them from being able to move forward with that work.
Let me look at this section again. Okay, as I read this applies to all development activity, all development activities. So, and development activities are defined as clearing, grading, the whole, you're building things, but also clearing and grading. So this, as written, this requires more review ahead of time than we have historically done. And it's I don't see this as a big deal if, if you wanted to, well, first of all, you end up having to do stormwater review anyway if you clear more than 7,000 square feet. So then you've got to do a stormwater plan. It seems like it would be beneficial to the property owner if they're getting ready to develop and they've looked at the maps and they think they're okay and they want to clear some vegetation. If I were the property owner and there was an easy process to do it, I would come in and say, okay, here's what I have in mind. I looked at the maps, here's what I see on the maps. Am I good to go? I don't think it has to be a big deal, but I think it could save the property owner a lot of headache. Just
you used a couple of
key
things there. If there's an easy process.
If there's an easy, I think this doesn't.
I just don't want to have one more where now people are going to be waiting 8 weeks to get approval to be able to put in their septic system.
No.
Or,
no, I don't either.
Well, there's a phrase at the end of the sentence in the middle of the paragraph that it says, I think you were citing it, Patty, that you don't have something within 200 feet if it's geologically hazardous, or 300 if it's wetlands, et cetera. But then it says the department shall rule that the critical area review is complete. And so I guess the form of the department ruling that the critical area review is complete is important. And then what's the implication of them ruling that it's complete?
But what we're doing is we're saying, property owners, you cannot do anything on your property without a critical area review.
Right, but if they've done, this to me says, if you've evaluated it, both the department and the owner have agreed that you're outside of these threshold areas, that the department then will rule that the critical area review is complete. And so that's an action. And once that action occurs, it seems to me that you're free to move ahead.
You are, but it's only, right now, if I'm going to build a 8 by 10 garden shed on my property, it's below the requirement. I don't have to get a permit. I don't have to do a stormwater plan. And so I can go on my way and I don't have to do anything other than I still have the responsibility to make sure I'm not in a critical area. We now would be saying, because the only thing we're exempting is what's in, and I'm just trying to go back to our exemption section, the only thing we're exempting is, is these 9 things. Now we would be saying, in order to build a garden shed, you have to submit a plan to Community Development and Planning, and they have to review it and agree that you're not within 300 feet of a critical area, and then you can proceed with your garden shed.
Now, this sort of
Or
thing...
your garden, for that matter. I want to put in a garden. It's no longer exempt, it's a new garden, but I have to submit a plan and show where my critical areas are before I can put in a garden.
So this section applies to yes uses, and you look at table 3.1 and 3.2 to figure out what things are yes uses. Yeah, I don't know about the garden. If you were building some sort of little shed and it was below the threshold for a building permit, yeah, I think this could be easy enough that it's an over-the-counter sort of thing, where you come in, show us what you have, we'll take a look at the maps together and give you something saying, yep, we checked, no critical areas, you're good to go.
Yeah, live on Orcas and Lopez, and you've just consumed a day of time to get over here and do that. So it's not as easy as we might like to believe it to be.
Why can't it be done online somehow?
It could perhaps be done online. All we'd need is a description of what you're planning to do and where you're planning to do it and your parcel number, and we can pull up the maps, and yeah, so could perhaps be done online too, and then we shoot you an email and say, yep, we checked, it looks good. Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I don't have any issue with this process whatsoever for building homes, for things that require permits. It's when we start including, and so I'm just, maybe I'm overreacting, but does a project, maybe I'm reading it wrong, does it start to pull in those other things?
I think it needs to include removal of vegetation, because if you start whacking down the vegetation adjacent to the wetland, adjacent to the stream, adjacent to nearshore areas, that's going to have a negative effect, or potentially have a negative effect on those critical areas. So it needs to cover vegetation removal.
For an 8 by 10 garden shed? Or for a garden?
Well, it depends how big it is.
I guess my concern here goes to it demonstrates my faith in human nature or something, but if someone tries to hide their critical area somehow, I just wonder, we've got some characters in this county that, would rather try to cover something up. Is it possible to just take a bulldozer and get rid of your critical area and go, well, there wasn't one there?